Making contact with spirits has been practiced for thousands of years, from the ancient Egyptians' belief in the afterlife, contacting the gods and goddesses for answers to political, financial, and personal issues, to the Greeks' oracle at Delphi, who used the bay leaf to enhance their contact and communication with the dead and the gods, as well as to see the future, to the Roman sphere of witches using necromancy, and to the Celts and Norsemen, and into the Middle Ages with the discovery of witchcraft. Contacting the dead has been a fascinating historical topic for many historians. In this episode, I briefly explore the history of seances in the United States and how its popularity has grown through history. I will also briefly explore how the practice of seances made it into the history of social and political history, as well as into the history of the White House. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of For the Love of History. The popularity in seances started in 1848 when two sisters from Hinesville, New York, Maggie Fox 14 and Kate Fox 11, shared with their neighbors that their house was haunted. The girls said that they had developed a way to communicate with the spirits by way of knocking. One knock for yes and two knocks for no. These sisters rapidly became popular locally and later nationally. Maggie and Kate found themselves traveling all over the north of the United States, conducting seances for individuals and in showcases to prove that spirit communication exists. These sisters were sought after by many people to help in connecting them to their deceased loved ones. Seances became more popular with women who had lost children or husbands, and also with women who felt their voices needed to be heard. What some don't know is that the seance is part of social and political history. According to a thesis written by MA student Michelle Hamilton at the University of San Diego, she found that the seance became an opportunity for women in the 18th and 19th century to use spirit communication in backing up their opinions and thoughts in issues such as abolition, women's rights, and more, and to sway their husbands and those in politics to see their side. Not only was the seance part of social and political history, but interestingly enough, it also became part of the history of the White House. According to historians, biographers, and authors, U.S. presidents such as Truman, Roosevelt, Churchill, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Obama have all experienced something paranormal in the White House. Jenna Bush, daughter of our 43rd President George W. Bush, was quoted as saying, "The White House has to be haunted." They were very musical and came with no harm. They were kind, friendly, compassionate ghosts. Jenna also states, "Barbara and I were going to sleep one night. Our rooms were right next to each other, and I was in college, and people would call late. Our phone rang, I woke up, and I heard 1920s piano music coming from our fireplace. You could feel the music from the fireplace. You can't imagine what happened there. It was terrifying." She mentioned this to a friend working at the White House at the time, and they reportedly responded, "Oh, Jenna, you wouldn't believe what I have seen." Ghost stories have been told about the White House for over 150 years, so what caused the White House to become haunted in the first place? Well, I believe it all started in 1853, when the Fox sisters were invited multiple times to conduct their famous seances by President Franklin Pierce's wife, Jane Appleton Pierce. Jane and Franklin had experienced losses before Franklin had become president. They had 3 sons, and 2 had died very young before Franklin began his presidency in 1852. On the day of Franklin's inauguration, Franklin, his wife Jane, and an 11-year-old son Benny boarded a train to Massachusetts to attend the inauguration. On their way to Massachusetts, the train unhooked from the rails and rolled off. According to sources, Franklin was quoted as stating, "I quickly grabbed Jane and my son Benny, but Benny slipped from my hands and was thrown by the train." After escaping the wreckage, he found Benny laying down with his hat over his face. Franklin lifted Benny's hat and found that Benny's face had been crushed. Now Franklin and his wife Jane were experiencing another tragic loss, and it seemed to really darken their atmosphere, understandably. Jane had gone into a very dark place mentally and spiritually. She blamed Franklin for getting into politics, and she began distancing herself from her Christian faith. Although she had her Christian beliefs, she began making exceptions and creating space for spiritualism, which was very popular at the time. Jane isolated herself in her room, writing many letters to her deceased son. Some letters found and housed at the New Hampshire Historical Society tell of Jane's heartbreak and longing to see Ben and hear his voice one last time. These letters were dated January 30th, 1853. Was this an attempt at Jane developing a way to connect with Benny's spirit? I ask because it's been shared that Franklin, during Jane's seclusion, had heard Jane conversing with someone in her room. He was hearing child voices and giggles. I have yet to find evidence of this. However, it was during the rise of the Fox sisters and Spiritualism, so it's highly possible that Jane was trying to find her own way of contacting Benny. After spending weeks in seclusion, Jane had stepped out with something dark about her. She focused next on getting either one or both of the Fox sisters out to Washington to conduct a seance in hopes of bringing forth Benny. This was the start of many trips the Fox sisters would make to help Jane contact Ben. This also sparked the rise of spiritualism in the South, which also helped spiritualism and voodoo in New Orleans to become almost normalized in society. There was more curiosity toward spiritual African culture. We also begin to see in both the North and South a rise in mediumship with women claiming they have the ability to see, hear, and bring forth the dead. Now, going back to the beginning of spiritualism in 1848, the Ouija board was created, inspired by the Fox sisters. We also get the rise in psychic readings and the use of tarot cards, which actually has its origins in ancient Egypt. Then we start to see works by frauds who developed spirit photography in 1861 after the Civil War. This was the perfect financial opportunity for spirit photographer inventor William Mumler, using the rise of spiritualism for financial gain. It was in the 1860s that history sees another rise in spiritualism. With more than 610,000 lives taken during the Civil War, mourners turned to mediums, tarot cards, seances, and spirit photography to connect to their deceased loved ones. The Fox sisters and spirit photography became an interest to another First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln. In 1848, during the rise of spiritualism, Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary Todd Lincoln were very busy with Abraham's political career and becoming parents. In 1861, Mr. Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States. In 1862, the Lincoln family hosted a party at the White House. Their 11-year-old son Willie had been ill with typhoid fever, but had been showing signs of getting better. With the physician looking after Willie, the Lincolns reluctantly went down to meet their guests. It was during that party that Willie's condition suddenly got worse. His health was deteriorating, and 15 days later, on February 20th, 1862, Willie passed away. Both Abraham and Mary had roots in metaphysical practices stemming from ancestral connections. They both, interestingly enough, saw a greater connection to metaphysics than a Christian or Presbyterian religion. It was because of their connection to their ancestral spiritual practices that the Lincolns were open to conducting seances hosted by the Fox sisters and other mediums at the White House. And obviously, their hope was to contact their deceased son Willie. As time goes on, the Lincolns do reconnect with their religions. However, it wasn't until after Abraham is assassinated in 1865 that Mary gives spirit photography a go. and connects with William Mumler in 1870 to capture her deceased husband's spirit. That image quickly skyrocketed Mumler's fame, and he became known as the guy who captured Abraham Lincoln's spirit. From that point on, we see a fluctuation in the popularity of spiritualism in the United States. The population rises again after World War II, and then again in the 1970s. Looking at the present time, 2023, about to move into 2024, we see the popularity in spirit communication at its peak, with paranormal TV shows where we see seances being conducted by mediums or those who identify as witches. We have metaphysical shops that offer all types of readings, including conducting seances. We also see the union of both men and women conducting these readings or seances or doing ghost hunting together. It is now something that is universal and not just secluded by one gender. We also have movies out that are based on real life ghost stories, and within those movies, a lot of them do tend to begin with somebody, doing a seance, and then from that seance, their house or, wherever they're at, it becomes haunted. And so we really do see a rise now more than ever, the use of seances in spirit communication. Well, listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of For the Love of History. And until next time, as always, keep loving history and stay curious.